haven't had a chance to meet yet, my name is Scott. I've been with Acceleration Point, founded it 16 years ago, and I've been working in medical affairs ever since. And really, really looking forward to spending some time with you today on a very important topic around asking powerful questions to get better insights. And last month, I had this amazing opportunity to present this topic at the Medical Affairs Professional Society session in London. And really, for the first time, I had a chance to do this with a co host, Anna from Gilead. She's the director of medical excellence in their learning and development team. And Anna and I have worked together for a while, but it was our first time co facilitating, and it was so much fun. Anna, so glad that you're here to co facilitate again today. Do you want to just maybe introduce yourself and tell everybody a little bit about your background?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Scott. So first of all, sort of rhetorical question for everyone. You don't have to answer it. My question is, have you ever been interacting with someone and all of a sudden you notice a real shift in the energy? Maybe the person you're speaking to is suddenly quiet and you can see that they're really thinking. Maybe their eyes are going up to the air, or suddenly you just feel like they're opening up to you, or maybe even your relationship with that person feels stronger. And often this is the power of a really, really good question, probably one that you asked. My name's Anna, as Scott said. Thanks for the introduction. And I work in medical affairs, learning and development at Gilead Sciences, focusing specifically on building capabilities. And I have to say that for me, questioning is a topic that really, really inspires and motivates me. I've worked for many years in pharma, mostly in medical affairs, but actually in commercial previously as well. And something that really motivates and excites me is when I hear how someone was able to move a project forward, develop a relationship, or perhaps even overcome a challenge just because they asked the right questions at the right time to the right people. So I'm really, really excited about this webinar where we get to talk about questions for a whole hour. Super exciting for me and great to be working with Scott again as well. I'm really, really looking forward to hearing some other thoughts, ideas, and perspectives from everybody else.
I think that as both Anna and I have worked with teams on doing insight generation work, we hear some common challenges that tend to come up repeatedly. And those include one, I don't have time during my engagement to gather meaningful insight data. I need to find out kind of how to get to that maybe a little bit faster. The second thing that we hear is that I've got too many things I'm supposed to be listening for, right? I don't know exactly what is important to my organization right now. And then the final one is I don't want to feel like I'm interrogating a KOL with like a list of questions and having to feel like I'm in that questioning interviewer mode. Um, those are three challenges that we hear every single time we've done workshops on insight generation, and specifically on this part of it around gathering insights. Maybe it would be helpful. Maybe it's one of these three. Maybe it's something else. But really quick in the chat, what is the biggest challenge you're facing in gathering meaningful insights data during your thought leader engagements? Can you just maybe type that in the chat for us so we have something to go off of here? Okay, number two, too many things to listen for. Too many things to listen for. All right. Well, okay. So for most folks, it's too many things to listen for. All right. Well, we will certainly cover that today. And so I guess let's actually just talk about that right now. I think that before we get into how to gather more powerful data, let's just cover the too many things to listen for. And I'll go first, maybe share just a couple of things that I've seen work well in helping to focus. And then if you have additional things to add. So the first thing is that not every key insight question, not every strategy is covered during every single engagement and interaction. And so one of the things that we find is most important in gathering actionable information or like during an engagement is to know what decisions is your organization trying to make in the next 8 to 12 months that they would like to have more information to make to feel more confident in those decisions. One of the questions I'll often ask when I'm working with medical directors and field leaders when they're trying to create key insight questions and share those with our field teams is if you had an advisory board for the next 60 days and could invite 100 of your top thought leaders to that advisory board, what question would you ask and what would you do with that answer? And that helps the team to think in more specific questions like they would during an advisory board. And then you can then focus, okay, I don't have 100 things this month that are important. I have 7 or 8. Now, you may also have multiple products that you're supporting, multiple diseases that you're supporting. And so you may have that list for multiple, but during pre engagement planning, it's really important to go, okay, I'm going in, we're talking about this particular disease or this particular therapeutic area. And based on where we left off in the conversation, these are the things that are most likely to come up. So let me just review the 2 or 3 most important key insight questions related to that topic so that I'm ready to listen for those and ask the questions related to those. And is there anything you would add to that?
Yeah, I would agree with that, Scott. And I would also say it's often the opportunity to comes there to ask more questions. As crazy as that might sound, if a healthcare professional or a stakeholder or whoever it is firing lots of different bits of information at you and you're not quite sure where to go next, and we've all been in that situation, asking a simple question, trying to narrow down what's most important to them of all the things that they've mentioned, of all the things that you could talk about for the rest of this conversation, what is most important for them. And even if that doesn't necessarily line up with your objectives for the meeting, it can certainly help to generate rapport, get a better understanding of what is important to them, and potentially generate more insights as well.
Awesome. Love it. So I hope that helps. Anytime throughout today, just put additional questions in the chat. We're happy to address them as we go. So Anna said something important there around asking more questions. And one of the things that we find is that sometimes we get in our own heads around, oh, here's this big long list of questions that I need to remember to ask. When most of the time, if we are engaged actively in a conversation with an HCP or with a KOL, we will hear, if we're listening, triggers to ask the right next question. And so today we're going to teach you an advanced questioning technique, one that is based on what triggers are happening in the conversation that leads you to what the right next question is. So it's a listening activity plus how do I ask the right next question? And this is a little bit different than what you may have done because most teams have done some type of basic question training. You might have been part of one called the 5 whys, right? Which in spirit is really positive, right? It's about digging deeper and deeper and deeper. But sometimes the question isn't why, right? And if, sometimes I think teams will take this as something a little bit too simplistic. And in reality, we want to have a more sophisticated approach than just asking why 5 times. We want to dig in based on what we're hearing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you these 4 types of questions that you use in 4 very specific situations, so that when you hear the situation, you then know how to respond because it's instinctual and you can do it quickly. You can do it in context. It doesn't feel forced like an interview. It's because of what the HCP or KOL said. So let's jump into what those are. So there's 4 types of questions. The first is information questions. Now, when you're seeking more information, it's because you completely understood what you were told, and it's your opportunity to go broader or to go deeper, right? And these are the questions we really are excited to get to because it moves us into deeper insight. But sometimes when we're listening to what the HCP says, we may not fully understand what was told to us. Like we couldn't picture it. If 15 different folks in your organization heard the HCP say the exact same thing, you might have 15 different interpretations of what they meant. When you have that, our first job before we can ask for more information is to clarify, right? Clarify what was asked. I'm going to show you examples of each of these here in a moment. Clarification questions. The next situation is that you might be told something, but they're making an implication about something else. And again, I'll show you an example. But often it's important to verify that implication. And there's a specific way to ask the question to help verify the implication. And then the last kind of question is a discrepancy question. And a discrepancy question gets triggered when you have two pieces of information that can't coexist, right? They said one thing and then later they said something else. And you look at those two things and go, well, how is that possible, right? They contradict each other. It might have been in the same conversation. It might be something they said from podium, but say something different to you. It might be something they say to you, but that's different than what they said online. So when you have two pieces of information, it triggers, like you see it, it causes you to ask that discrepancy question. And so what we're going to do is we're going to talk about how we want to get to the information question as much as we can, right? Because that's where we can go deeper. And Anna's going to show you this really great way to go deeper and deeper using these information questions. However, if there's something to clarify, an implication to check, or a discrepancy to clear up, it's important that we do that first so that we don't miss it, right? When the trigger happens, we want to jump in and take care of it right away. All right. So, Anna, anything to add before we jump into the exercises and the practice?
No, I don't think so. There was one thing on my mind, and it's slightly gone from my head as I've been listening to you speak. But sometimes, if you can't think what the next question is, it's because you're trying to think what the next question is, because your brain is engaged thinking about the next question and not actually listening to the answer to the last one. If you think about it when you're having a conversation with your friends, you're not thinking about the next question to ask. If someone says, "Hey, I just went on a great vacation to, I don't know, Africa or somewhere," you're not thinking, "Oh, right, what question shall I ask next?" It just comes naturally. So better to listen so that you really understand what's coming, and then the question will just flow. You won't need to think about it quite so hard.
Absolutely. And let's practice that, right? Because I think, what Anna's saying is like the question comes from what the HCP says, not from your list of pre-created questions, right? So let's try one, right? So a clarification question, right? So let's say the HCP says, I don't like to treat my severe patients right away. Just in the chat, what question could you ask to clarify that? Because if 15 people heard the HCP say this, we might have 15 different interpretations of what that meant. Just in the chat, what's a good follow-up question to this? How so? Tell me more. What do you mean by severe? How do you define severe? Yep. What symptoms do you think are severe? Excellent. Good. Yeah. So the more specific you can make the question, the better, right? So, yes, you could ask why, or you could ask, tell me more. But the more specific, right? They said, I don't like to treat my severe patients right away. Going back and saying, oh, well, how do you define severe? At what point do you consider somebody severe? Or another part of the question could be, right, I think some people are saying this. What do you mean right away? Does that mean same day, same month, same year? What does that mean? Right. So again, two different people could hear that, interpret it two different ways. And so the more specific that you can get with your question around, oh, great. What do you mean? Like, when does somebody become severe in your mind? What is the symptoms for that? Or, oh, when somebody does hit that threshold, what do you mean by right away? Right? When do you treat them when they hit that trigger? Does everybody see how that adds significant clarity to the question? Okay. When do you treat them and why? Great. Okay. Um, One of the tricks is to use as much of the HCP's language in your question as possible. Right. One, it shows you that you're listening versus trying to go off of your own questions. And two, it's a lot easier for you. Right. You don't need to come up with new ways of asking. Okay. And anything to add on clarification questions?
No, not at this stage. When we get to the information questions piece, I
Oh
think
yeah.
probably more to add.
That's your passion right there. Excellent. Let's do another practice. So When you hear somebody say something, but they might be implying something else, we have to confirm that implication because they might not have meant it. They might not have even realized they made that implication. So when we hear somebody say something like, I have not seen data showing safety for patients over 50, what are they implying? What are they really saying within that conversation? Right? Because they're just stating a matter of fact, right? But why would they be saying that? What's a follow up question that you might ask in order to clarify out that implication and check it? Put some in the chat. Let's see what you have here. All of the first ones were really good. Let's be as specific as you can. If you were going to verify that implication, okay. So does that make you less likely to use drugs in the drug in those that are over 50? Excellent. Is there a specific safety concern that you're wondering about? What concern do you have about? Great. Yeah. So they're implying maybe that they have a concern. Another implication is that more data for that patient population might what? It might change their perspective, right? So a couple of examples might be, got it. What data would you need to inform your treatment decisions for patients over 50, right? Yeah, Allison, that's right on. What data would you like to see? Right. And again, just adding that little bit of extra, right? Of, oh, great. What data would you like to see about patients at over 50? Or how would that impact your decisions about patients over 50? If there were data showing this, how would that impact your decisions? Great. Okay. So that's the next one is really when you see these implications, right? It's happening right in front of you. Don't go to a list of questions. Clarify it. Take that implication, put it out on the table. Let's see what this one says. These patients populations, the incidence of disease is lower compared to pediatric patients. Yeah, so perhaps, right? Perhaps in your conversation, you've already stated something contrary to what they bring up, and so that you might just want to verify compared to what I was saying. This is something that you see as different. Wonderful, excellent. Let's go to the next kind. These are one of my favorites. So, discrepancy questions. Again, a discrepancy is when you're really, really listening to what the HCP is saying, and there's two pieces of information that just can't coexist, right? Like they're contradictory to each other. So perhaps they say, I don't plan to even consider XYZ until they're approved by the FDA because I only use FDA approved treatments. But then in a different conversation, sometimes even later in the same conversation, somebody will say something like, oh, well, I utilize ABC in patients who don't have insurance that pays for other treatments, and ABC isn't approved for that indication. So now we've got two different things. I never, right? I only use treatments, and then I have an exception to that. How would you clarify that discrepancy? What question could you ask? Again, try to be as specific as possible to the question that's being asked here, to the statements that were made. How could you learn an insight about why this is what she is saying? What's a good follow up question? Come on, you've been asking good ones already. I know this one's a little harder. Put it in the chat. All right, I'm going to help you out here a little bit. Oh, here we go. Evan, thanks for trying. Let's see what it says. So, what makes you comfortable using ABC off level? Yes, I'm hearing that you use ABC even though it's not approved. That's interesting. Why did you decide to do that? What information led you to be comfortable? Yeah, absolutely. Right. So, nice job, everyone. So, one thing that here we go. Alicia, nice job. Are there cases where you make exceptions to utilizing? Yep. And I will ask the same question. Excellent. So, very good. So, one of the ways to take the questions that you just wrote and go just one step further is to actually point out the two pieces of data in the question. So, what is it about ABC that makes it different given that it is not currently approved? right? So you've told me that you don't only use approved treatment. So what is it about ABC that makes it different, given that it's not currently approved, right? And again, all of your questions would get there. I'm just offering one that's a little bit more targeted, right? And over time, as you practice questions, right, these questions get sharper and sharper and sharper over time. Now, all three of these question types, right? You're on the journey, you're having the conversation, and all three of these question types are because you hear something from the HCP that you go, oh, I have to clarify that, or I need to check the implication, or, ooh, there's a discrepancy. I better clear that up so that I can get back to the main course of conversation. So I can get back to gathering deeper and broader information to help inform decisions. That's when we get back to asking information questions. So I'm going to turn this over to Anna because Anna has an amazing framework to help us think about ways to get deeper and deeper and more insightful with all of our questions.
Thank you, Scott. Yeah, so for me, there's sort of three levels of information questions. What I will say at this point is there is some overlap, particularly at the high level questions level, between the sorts of questions that you would ask to gather more information and start to uncover insights at that deeper level. And yeah, some overlap with that, as you would have for the discrepancy questions, the implication and the clarification questions. So yeah, those are the three levels. The high level, the TED questions, which stands for tell me, explain, describe, and then beliefs questions. These are the questions that really dig deep into the motivations and beliefs that really drives a healthcare professional's thoughts, motivates them, and helps you understand why they're thinking a certain way or why something is important to them. So those are the three levels. So yeah, starting with the high level questions, as I said, there may be some overlap here with the other questions that we've been looking at just now. And these are your open questions. I'm sure everyone on this webinar is very familiar with the open questions, the who, why, when, what, how, to gather more information. And also those confirmation questions, the questions that you ask just to ensure that you have understood them correctly. So have I understood correctly that what you're saying is the number of side effects with X means I'm more likely to use product Y, for example? So maybe at this point, Scott, can we ask people what some high-level questions might be? So particularly the open questions. If a healthcare professional says the number of side effects with X means I'm more likely to use product Y, what question might you ask to start to dig a little bit deeper into that point from the healthcare professional?
Yeah, drop it in the chat. Let's see. So you understood everything that was said. It makes sense. Now you want to keep the conversation moving along. So what question would you ask to continue the conversation to get more information about this? Roll up those sleeves. Let's get them in there. All right. Is there a certain side effect that is more concerning to you? Okay. Yep, that's a good one, right? Because they're bringing up the side effects. Maybe it's not all of them. Maybe it's a specific one. What else? Nice job, Roseanne. Another example. Yeah, isn't it funny that this is a little bit harder because we understood everything. There's nothing to clarify. There's no implication. There's no discrepancy to trigger it. So we need to go deeper. What do you think about this one? If the HCP is interesting to use off-label and to see the results showing the efficacy and safety. So perhaps you could offer, okay, again, it's not asking a question, maybe offering the next step of the conversation.
What about the one from Alicia? It says, tell me about product Y profile. What specifically are you concerned about?
Yeah, that's a good one. Tell us why you jumped in on that one, Anna.
Because I think it will move the conversation along. It's one that will, it shows that you're interested. So not only will it move the conversation along, but it will start to engage the healthcare professional and open them up. In fact, so with the next one, how does severity of side effects impact your decision? Again, that's going to move the conversation along. You've understood everything, and now you're just trying to see what happens next.
Excellent. And I think that's similar to, hey, is it only the number of side effects or is it the severity?
Yeah. Yeah, and there's a few of the confirmation questions coming in here as well, the ones where there's a sort of yes or no answer, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, because sometimes you do just need to clarify whether it's something specific. Is there a specific number? Yes, you maybe need to know that.
Yeah, check this one out by Evan too. Do you mean the
Yeah.
number as in incidence of them or breadth of stuff? Yeah, that's great. So maybe you saw a clarification opportunity that we didn't. That's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Excellent.
All right, we can move on to the next one. So these are the TED questions. These are my favorite because we get to put up a little icon of a teddy bear, which everyone loves a teddy bear, right? And these technically, I suppose, are not really questions, but they're an opportunity to move the conversation along, but start to dig a little bit deep. So TED stands for tell me, explain, describe. And as I said, this is an opportunity to really start to delve a little bit deeper. And I did actually notice a couple of these coming in and in the examples just now of people saying, tell me more, explain why that's a concern for you. Those kind of questions coming in. So perhaps, again, we can drop more questions in the chat, some TED questions that would help dive a little bit deeper as to what it is about what the healthcare professional is saying about side effects. And that will just take you a little bit deeper than those initial open questions would.
Yeah. So these are still open questions, but we're giving you more structure. We're giving you another way of asking them, right? So try your question again with tell me, explain, or describe.
And I think what this often does is it gives a little bit more context, right? So you're deliberately being less specific with your question so that you can understand more of the context from the healthcare professional's viewpoint.
Tell me what side effects of products concern you the most. Can you
Yeah.
explain what you mean by number? Oh, what do you think of this one? Describe your experiences with X and Y and the safety profiles you've seen.
Yeah, I like that. That's great. Describe your experiences with X and Y and the safety profiles you've seen, because that's very, very open and it will really help you to understand the context of the question. In fact, all of these are good. Tell me more about these side effects as one I've just seen.
And what are your concerns about about the side effects? Which side effects could you avoid? Right?
Yeah. Describe which side effects are most concerning and why.
Excellent.
Getting into it now. Always takes a little bit of time to think about these ones.
AE reporting is top of mind on the experience. Yeah, absolutely. You have to always report what you find if, based on your company's policies. And if you have, a full AE to report, definitely versus, kind of the vague experiences. Yeah. Here, one more for you, Anna. Can you describe to me some of the AEs and explain to me why it's a concern for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, these are all great questions, and they're really an opportunity to dive a little bit deeper, but to also get more context at the same time. And what I would say at this point is that when you're actually in the moment with a healthcare professional, it's often very difficult to suddenly pull out a TED question. We can see how long it's taking people to think about what these questions are, and this is a practice environment and not a real healthcare professional. So what I would actually encourage you to do is practice with your friends, with your family, with your colleagues. Just whenever you get the opportunity, when someone's talking to you about, even if it's just their holiday, say, tell me more about that. Tell me why you chose to go on safari on horseback riding, Scott. Tell me more about that.
Yeah,
that's where Scott's going on holiday, by the way. But yeah, so just any opportunity to practice those sorts of questions, and then it will start to become more familiar, automatic. So then there's the third layer of questions, the belief questions. These for me are the ones that are really, really critical and the ones that often get missed out when we're pressed for time, when we're trying to deal with too much information coming at us. These are the ones that will really, really help you not only understand where a healthcare professional is coming from or why something is important to them, but actually it also really, really impacts on your relationship with them and really helps you to build that connection that you want if you want to have that good ongoing peer-to-peer relationship with them. And these are the belief questions. So really starting to understand the impact, the consequences, and the feelings, and actually using those words in your questions. So now in the chat, and I suspect these may be more difficult, but maybe not. Let's see. Try and think of some questions and put them in the chat that would really, really start to understand from the healthcare professional what the impact is, the consequences, or their feelings if the number of side effects with X means they're more likely to use product Y.
Yeah, this one gets harder, right? Because if we want to go beyond the what and the why, and now we're getting into belief, we're getting into like what is the actual impact of that belief, right?
I will say often these are the questions that you feel a bit silly asking because it might seem obvious. So, for example, if there's a side effect like diarrhea, for example, it might seem obvious what the impact of diarrhea is, but it's actually not the same for everyone if you think about it. So it's definitely worth asking the question. And if you are concerned that it sounds a little bit silly, you can even say that and say, this might sound like an obvious question, but I'm going to ask it anyway because I really want to understand your perspective and then follow it up.
What do you think about this one from Evan? Oh, so are you finding it difficult, or how difficult do you find managing the side effects of those therapies?
Absolutely. That's starting to get into it. That's definitely starting to get into it. And then you can even explore more and say, so given how difficult that is, what impact does that have on managing your patients, on the time you have to spend with them, on the time your team has to spend with them? What are the consequences of the fact that it's so difficult?
Yeah. How about Alicia? So, have you had any specific experiences with product X, or have you had a negative experience around these certain side effects? So, what was that previous experience that's causing them to feel this way today?
Absolutely. So tying into previous experiences can really start to make people think about how they felt when they've dealt with it in the past. Someone's put in there, think like a therapist. Yeah, it can be a little bit like that.
Thanks, Denise. And I want to just call out Vanessa's here because I think this is really interesting, right? So, if the doctors look at drug excess safer results with superiority, there is maybe a implication in here, right? That we could actually go in and check, which is that the benefit trade-off of Y isn't great enough to be worth the safety side effects that they're seeing, right? And so really kind of going into that one other step, which Vanessa, I think is kind of what you're saying in here is, hey, you know what? I get it. I hear that. Is there a reason that you're even considering why then? Is there like why is this right? Why is this even up for consideration then?
If you've perhaps missed an implication from before, sometimes it will come out at this stage, which I think is what Vanessa's sort of suggesting here, is that perhaps there's an implication there that, yes, the number of side effects with X means you're more likely to use product Y, and actually product Y might not be quite as good, but that doesn't matter because the side effects are so bad. So sometimes when you ask about the impact of that and the consequences, that's when it will actually come out. And then it's important to go back and say, oh, okay, right. So just so I can clarify, you still feel that product X has better efficacy, but actually the side effects don't outweigh that
Is
efficacy.
that right?
So it's an opportunity to go back. It doesn't, just because you've got to this belief questions phase, it doesn't mean you can't go back and clarify something if it comes up later.
Yeah, absolutely. And I see the consequences word in this one.
Lovely. Yeah.
Yeah, comment on this one.
Yeah. How do you see the long-term subsequent consequences with the most frequent AE in your experience with your patients? So yeah, the emphasis there being on the word consequences. What are the consequences? Let them answer, see what they come up with. And then you could even follow that up with, okay, so, and what's the impact of that? How does that make you feel? If your patient keeps coming to you and saying they've got these terrible side effects.
Absolutely. So what we find is that when we've done workshops, both at MAPS, but then also with teams, both, and how many times have you probably taught questions?
More
to-
than I can count.
Yeah. So whether it's with individual teams or I've had the chance to do this across organizations, we find that it takes practice in order to trigger the recognition for the question. And so, one of the things I know Anna mentioned practicing with friends and family. One of the other things that I find helps develop that skill, develop that intuition, develop that instant response where the question just like it's obvious, it just falls into your lap, is to practice as a team. And so one of the techniques that we do with folks that are using Quello with our Insights platform is that we'll actually pull out some of the free text and take 4 or 5 at the beginning of a field team meeting and just one at a time put up a statement that the HCP said. And we don't want to evaluate it. We don't care if it's good or great or useful or not useful, because whatever state that insight was in, asking one more question could make it even better. And so at first, what we find happens is that we'll put up the question and everybody sits there kind of quietly. And then just like on the practice today, we'll start getting a couple of responses. By the next 2 or 3 times that we've done this with the team, the questions are just coming out a lot faster. By the 3rd or 4th time we do this exercise, somebody goes, "Oh, that was mine. And here's the question that I should have asked. And I didn't think to ask it. I'm going to ask it next time." And then eventually people go, "Wow, these are really, really good," because we're thinking of the question in the moment, in the conversation, so that it is useful right there when we're collecting the data. So it's iterative, it takes practice. And I remember in London when we were together for Maps, you asked the room full of field leaders, mostly, and some MSLs, how many hours they spent learning science in university, and then asked the question, "How many of you took a 3 credit class on asking questions?" Right, and like no hand went up. Right? So this isn't something that we've spent time learning. It seems like it should be intuitive, but a lot of intuitive things, there's a science behind it and requires practice. So let's just pause, see if anybody has any questions. It could be about these questioning techniques, it could be about other insight related topics. What questions do you have? Just put them up real quick. I have a question for you. So one of the things that came up earlier One of the questions that came up earlier was, how to ask questions in a way that it doesn't feel intimidating. It doesn't feel like you're interrogating your HCP. In the workshops that you've done, do you have any tips and tricks on how to keep it conversational versus it feeling like I've got a list of 15 things I need to get through?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I would say obviously have an agenda. We all need to have an agenda, but be prepared to put it aside for the sake of the conversation. As I said before, if you're really, really listening to your healthcare professional, it won't sound like an interrogation because you won't, although you might have pre-planned some questions or some topics that you want to ask in an ideal scenario. Ideally, you want to respond to what they say. You want to really, really listen and hear what they say, and then your question will come naturally. So that would be the biggest tip I would say is, yes, sure, have some ideas in your head, have an agenda in mind, have a sort of plan, but be prepared to flex it. And most importantly, listen to what the healthcare professional is saying before you just chime in with your next question, because otherwise it will just sound like an interrogation.
Got it. That's a good one. Let's answer some of these questions. So Gretchen asked, do you have suggestions for practicing asking questions like these on your own time?
That's a really good question. And I know there are a lot of AI tools out there. So Scott and I have had a lot of conversations recently about AI tools. We're actually looking at Gilead at potentially piloting some of these. I know our commercial team have already actually piloting AI engagement tools where you can practice having these conversations. And not only does I've trialed one or two actually. Not only is it's an avatar, but it's very, very realistic. And not only is the conversation quite realistic, but it actually gives you a score at the end. So it's super helpful. It gives you a score, it gives you tips and techniques as well. So if you can persuade your organization to provide some of these AI tools, I would highly, highly recommend it. Otherwise, as Scott said, practicing with your teams, practicing with a peer, even if it's just 10 minutes on a Zoom call, can be very, very helpful. Or as I say, just practice with your partner at home, with your kids, with your friends. All of these things are helpful.
Yeah. And I would add, I find that the more that you practice this, right? And I'm going to actually bring in Roseanne's question here too. Is there a way to practice listening so you can ask the better questions? Active listening, that's exactly what I was going to say. Active listening is a skill to practice. I actually worked with a one of the world's best coaches on active listening. His name is Robert Fritz, and the skill that he has you do to practice active listening is called visual thinking. Right. So if I asked you all to close your eyes and I said, um, there is a there is a green field with a brown horse standing in it underneath a blue sky. You don't see letters and words showing up, right? You see a green field and you see a brown horse and you see a blue sky, right? Like you actually see the visual of what they're saying. And so when you're able to picture something because of what somebody's describing to you, it's by seeing it. It's by picturing the relationship between that HCP and that patient, or that feeling that they're having afterwards when they just had to explain a side effect to that patient, right? Using some of the examples we had today, it's picturing it that allows you to examine it and see the question. Right. So active listening is something you can certainly practice. Audiobooks are really good for practicing active listening. If you can really picture it, is something to practice around active listening. The other thing around practicing on your own is this is something that when you start to just do it, you can't help yourself. Right. Like I do notice every time I'm in a conversation with Anna, she asks me really good questions. And it doesn't feel like an interrogation. It feels like she actually cares, which she does. And so do this like all the time, right? How many times, like I've been with my kids or with my spouse, and like I have to be like, oh, wait, I'm listening and I'm gonna actually ask questions because I'm hearing what you're saying and I'm asking. Now, she did oversee one of my webinars once and then realized I might be doing that on purpose. So it's a little funny thing between us, but do practice all the time. Laura's asking if we can share any of the AI tools. Perhaps we can include some in the show notes.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm very happy to share them with you, Scott, and you can share them.
Yeah, we can put that out. Yeah, so we'll put them in the show notes and get those out to you. But Laura, I will also share that even Perplexity, Genie, ChatGPT, Copilot, right? So if you guys have Copilot in your organization, we can make these slides available. I literally have taken these slides, loaded them into Copilot, and said, I am an MSL and I want to practice asking questions based on these slides when HCPs say things. Give me a scenario of an HCP saying something, and I will give you my question, and then please give me feedback. Right. So you can do it using Copilot, which is probably the one that you most likely have internally, where you might be able to do it within a more secure environment. Okay. Any other do's and don'ts, Anna?
I think you touched on one of the biggest do's for me is always ask one more question. You know, when you think you have got to the bottom of why a health professional or why anyone has something, ask one more question, because you may have got to the bottom, but you may not have. If you ask a question and they literally cannot answer it, then maybe you've got to the very bottom of it and you've fully understood. You've understood the context. You've understood the impact. You've understood how someone feels about something, what motivates, their response, etc. But it may be that something new comes out. And quite often, just by asking one more question, I've uncovered just a little nugget. And that's why, Scott, you made the comment, I always ask you lots of good questions. And I do genuinely care. But sometimes I ask them because I just want to see, is there something else there? Something else that's important to you that is going to help us get along, help me understand why you're doing something a certain way or whatever. So definitely ask one more question. That would be the big do. And then, as I said, don't not listen. That's sort of a double negative. But listening is absolutely critical. I think we could probably do a whole separate webinar. And one other piece of what I would also say is don't take notes. This may sound counterintuitive. I always thought I needed to take notes because if I don't take notes, I'm not going to remember what everyone said or what's been said or what I've been told. But actually what I realized is that when I was taking notes, I wasn't listening. So if I didn't know what to ask next, or I hadn't understood the conversation, it's because I wasn't listening. And by not taking notes, yeah, okay, you may not remember word for word exactly what was said, but you will remember the gist of what was said. So yeah, don't take notes because it's distracting. It's distracting for your brain. You will understand what's going on if you really, really, truly listen, and then you'll know what the next great question will be. And you can write the notes later.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess one other that I would probably add is that questioning skill isn't I am good or bad at it. It is a level of precision. So what I've found, so we've done sessions where we have reviewed either simulated or actually sometimes real interactions between MSLs and thought leaders. And we'll watch the interaction and the HCP will say something, right? They'll say something and then the MSL asks a question that isn't like directly connected to what the HCP said. And then they'll go, 2 or 3 questions in, but then they'll ask the question that they should have asked 4 questions ago. Because if they had been like really focused on what the HCP said, they would have hit it the first time. And so what I find is that asking questions is something that with practice, you get more precise. And as you get more precise with like the perfect next question, one, you can get more into an individual conversation because you're not walking a path that swiggles, right? You kind of go more straight line. And then two, you get better insights out of it, right? Because you don't get fogged with data that wasn't necessarily relevant. Okay, so do practice. That's another really good one. If any of your organizations are recording sessions, right, whether they're simulations between the team or live HCP sessions, when you're doing Zoom meetings and whatnot, reviewing them to here's what the HCP said, and then here's what I asked, and evaluating, was that really the perfect next question? The next time, that question will get better. Okay. 2 more questions, Anna. I'd love for these. Let's do this one first because there's an order to these. The question is, do you have any tips for what to do if a HCP says, I do not meet with people from industry?
I mean, if that's them telling you that, yeah, it is a tough one. So my first question to you would be, how important is it that you meet with that particular person? Because your decision might be dependent on how important that is. And ultimately, I guess if that was me, my inclination would be to say, okay, I completely understand that. I understand that you don't meet with industry people. And then just follow that up with just one question, which is, so what is the best way for me to support you? If you don't want to meet with me, what is the best way for me to support you? How could I help?
Wonderful.
And it may be that they say, you can't, I don't want anything to do with you. And, we all have healthcare professionals that are like that. And honestly, sometimes you just have to respect that. But sometimes you'll also find that just asking them how you can support them, you might find that they ask you to send you some data. They might say, well, okay, actually, I don't really meet with industry people, but I do go to this conference. I might come to the stand or something like that. So just by asking how you can best support them, then that would be the question I would ask them and see what you get back.
Love that. One other suggestion is before engaging with that person, do your homework. So 2 things. One, look in your CRM, see if anybody else within the organization has already established a relationship with that person. And then if you have any type of thought leader data, so there's a lot of providers out there that do KOL profiles as an example. Most of them include some type of industry report. So are they presenting data for a competitor? Because if they are, they're likely meeting with somebody from industry, just maybe not you or maybe not your organization. So it gives you a little bit of context around that. So I would definitely kind of look at those 2 things. And then, as Anna said, just asking, great, how can we support might be a good way of finding out what they clarifying. Maybe you don't want to meet with me, but is there another way I can support you? And then last question here from Evan is, okay, we get really good at asking all these questions. Now the conversation is really long. So, how do you wrap up a conversation, respecting their time, where you feel like you could keep on going for hours, but you kind of know that they're running up on their time?
Yeah, I mean, also a difficult question, but probably a slightly nicer one to deal with, in the sense that if the conversations are going long, it's because you've engaged them. It's because you've started to build that relationship and rapport with them. And so absolutely respecting their time is part of that. So I guess my instant response to that would be to say, hey, look, I realize we're coming up on time. So I want to be respectful of that. And I'm also very conscious that we could continue this conversation because there's so much more I want to find out about your perspective and where you're coming from on this. How are you doing for time? Have you got another 10 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever? Or would it be better if we reschedule another time to meet and give them the choice? Because it may be that they're happy to carry on, and it may be that they'd rather reschedule. But if you've started to build that rapport because the conversation is going long, you're probably going to be able to continue it, whether it's then or at a later stage.
Love it. Yeah, and really think of those conversations as interconnected over time. And speaking of coming up on time, we are at the top of our hour. Could everybody do me a quick favor? Anna was so gracious in giving of her time to share her expertise and her knowledge with us. Could we do the same thing back by sharing with her the biggest thing you took out of today's conversation? What's the one thing that you said, wow, I needed to hear that today? I'm going to be able to put that into place the moment I get back. Throw that in the chat for us. Let's share back with Anna what we heard, what we learned. That's the way that we thank our speakers. Don't take notes, practice. Listening first. Importance of listening. Love the TED framework. Yes. Excellent. Very good. Well, thank you all. Keep dropping those in. I do want to just let everybody know our next webinar is July 24th. We are going to dig into the role of the medical insight lead. And we're going to go into the challenges they face, how to help save your team time, how to make sure what you're getting back is insightful and useful and used by the organization, and how to do reporting in a much more streamlined way. We will make sure everybody on this webinar gets an email reminding you about this next one. And thank you so much for joining us. I love that we had so many great pieces of feedback here. Alicia, thank you. Gretchen, thank you. Allison, thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful week.
Thanks, everyone.